What's going on, everyone? Sam Rothstein here, acting principal clarinet with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, bringing you another episode of the Candid Clarinetist podcast. Today, I am joined by James Shields, who is the principal clarinet of the Oregon Symphony. I said that right. The Oregon Symphony, not Oregon.
I'm not even sure I know the answer to that. I think it was correct. That's what people around here say. Maybe Portlanders are not true Oregonians, depending on who you ask, but
Okay.
close enough. The
Okay.
key thing is you didn't call it the Portland Symphony Orchestra, which we get sometimes from conductors on stage, and you'll hear many groans from the orchestra.
Ah, gotcha. You're for the entire state, huh?
That's right. I
Okay.
think the Portland Symphony is in Maine.
Oh, right. That makes sense. So the Oregon Symphony, James recently posted a very interesting comment discussion topic on Facebook, and I thought it was really compelling, and I reached out to him. We have never met before, but I reached out to him and just say, hey, do you want to come talk about it on the podcast? Because I thought it was very thought-provoking. So if you don't mind, I'll just share what you wrote right here.
Absolutely.
And so he wrote, just as we are getting back to into the swing of things at the Oregon Symphony, I am being visited by my first struggles with performance anxiety in several years. I've talked to enough folks about this topic over the years to know that a lot of people who you might not expect have had their struggles with performance anxiety, even if it can feel like you're the only one going through it. If anyone else out there is having a bumpier ride with performing these days than they'd like, you are not alone. So I just thought it was a really interesting thing because I think, amongst other things, performance anxiety is certainly a taboo topic amongst musicians. Everyone at least tries to fake like they know what they're doing. You know what I mean? And so I thought it was really interesting that you posted that. So what sort of prompted you making that comment publicly?
Well, I mean, there were a couple of factors. Not to like immediately get stuck in the eddy of social media commentary, but I mean, one of the sort of I forgot to turn on my phone. My bad. Cardinal sin right off the bat.
It's all good.
So as far as the whole social media thing goes, I try and have a loose rule that if I'm going to be using these platforms, that I'm going to occasionally actively participate in them rather than just like scroll endlessly through random stuff. And the other thing is, I feel like it's important every once in a while to just like share something real. And I know it can be a fine line. Some people don't like if you kind of overshare, about your struggles. And, I feel like there's a balance to strike there. But that's just kind of one of the rules I try and live by. And I just thought to myself, like this is all of a sudden having issues with this. I know, even though people hide it very well, like you said, I know just from talking to people over the years that a lot of people go through this, and just from like being generally interested in like, humans and human behavior, like all of us are, read some about psychology. Everybody, it's really easy to have that feeling that like everybody's paying attention to me and my problems and my shortcomings, something called the spotlight effect in psychology. And I think it's easy to fall into that way of thinking. And I think particularly if you're struggling with performance anxiety, that kind of thing can like be dialed up to like 100. But the fact is there may be several other people on stage who are going through that at the same time. And you just never know. I mean, people can go through the most tremendous struggles and you have no idea that something's happening. And, just thinking about like our industry and like the type of pressure we go through, the fact that we're doing something together on stage that is so vulnerable and so time sensitive, and you have to just kind of stay on the train, and knowing that people have these feelings, I just figured, honestly, a lot of it was selfish. I just decided in that moment, it's better for me to just put this out there. I had already said to my colleagues, hey, just randomly this month, like I started having some of these feelings. It's not a normal thing for me. I just wanted to admit that to you. And immediately people are like, oh, I've been having a hard time too. I've been blah, blah, blah. And I, honestly, I just want to say in some ways it's easy for me to put that out there, because I'm tenured in a position and I can stop and evaluate and say, even worst case scenario, if like some independent presenters are like, oh, well, maybe James has something funky going on, maybe we don't want to hire him. I'm still tenured in my job. So I just want to say that it may be easier to kind of be vulnerable about this stuff in a tenured position with an orchestra than if you're like a freelancer who's maybe kind of wondering about your next hires and, maintaining a certain reputation with your colleagues, maybe have a different kind of balance for you. But I don't know, it just felt like the right thing to do, to just come out and say it. This is where I'm at. And just put it out there just as a message of, solidarity for people who are going through that as well.
And were you expecting the response that you got? Like, I know the way you phrased it, it wasn't like, hey, let's all talk about this. It was just like, here's what I'm having trouble with. Boom. Like, You're not alone. So were you expecting to get the kind of response that you got from it?
To some degree, I think there was like a tiny part of my brain that was like, maybe people are going to take this the wrong way. And maybe some people did take it in a way that was counterproductive, or maybe there were some people who had some critical thoughts of like, don't put that out there. I did put a trigger warning on it just because I know that even just the discussion of these things, everybody's struggle with it can be different. And I think for some people, it's better to just kind of put it out of mind. And I totally respect that. But, in general, I was kind of thinking to myself, I know a lot of people struggle with this. And if anybody thinks badly of me for just like opening up about it, I don't know if those are the kind of people that I should be so worried about. And if it's just so rampant in our industry that like people are looking down on this, even though I know so many people at the highest levels are struggling or have had struggles with performance anxiety, then I kind of would want to know that too. You know what I mean? So I just decided that it was kind of worth it. I had some sense that I would get some comments from people, supportive comments, or people saying, I've been there, I totally get it. I was a little bit surprised by the like degree of, there are people from like top orchestras and like top opera careers, and people messaged me privately with their experiences and just like what works for them and that kind of thing. And yeah, I have to say it made a difference. I mean, this just happened. This was like last week. And it was just, I don't know if people have had this experience, but it can just be something that comes out of the blue, something you're not even remotely intellectually concerned about. And just like, whether it's the physiology of your body at that moment, or maybe you had an argument with a friend, or there's something else going on, you can just like in a moment, something can be triggered, and it can take like a week to kind of get out of your system or whatever. And so, it was really helpful to hear from all those people and just like have that feeling of like, of just like openness and like togetherness with the issue. Like, we're all on stage performing together. It is like a communal activity, and to like not share the personally difficult sides of things. I don't want to say it's weird. That's too much of a value judgment, but there is something that is kind of strange about that. I understand why it's hard to talk about these things. I kind of understand why a taboo has developed. I think it's worth interrogating that and maybe pushing back on it a little bit, and just saying, how could we create an environment at work that's going to be psychologically safe? Like, I don't think we need to be a fear-based industry. I don't think we need those feelings to motivate us. I think having a psychologically safe work environment and having the sense that colleagues are there to support each other, and that we're just honest about struggles we share, that just seems like something that's both possible and desirable, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think that the willingness for people to share those things are very low, because I think a lot of people don't. It's not that you don't trust your colleagues, but maybe they're not your closest acquaintances, or like you'd rather share it with your spouse or your parent or your close friend who's not a musician. But I'm actually in a really fortunate position that my colleagues are very supportive of that kind of thing. So like, I remember at the beginning of the year, obviously we were off for a good year, I'd say, probably playing with the orchestra, even more than that. And when I came back, like, I've always had trouble with like my right hand in terms of just like, not it being injured, but I've always had a lot of tension and like a lot of strain. And sometimes when I get a lot of tension or strain in my right hand, I have trouble with passages in my right hand. And so I confided that to our principal oboist. I was like, do you ever have problems with your right hand? And then she went on this whole thing about her thumb and how she's had so many problems with her thumb. And like, I had no idea. And I was glad to have that conversation with her, to just be like, look, like, I'm having a lot of trouble just playing like 4/16 notes evenly, like on my right hand. And she's like, oh yeah, like that happens to me too. And so it was kind of like I was like, I should probably do this more. Just talk about, I mean, you don't have to overshare, like you said, you don't have to overshare everything that's going on, but it was nice to have that experience of just like sharing in this challenge of what we do together.
Yeah.
Because, the spotlight thing is definitely real. Like I always feel like I'm the only one who's struggling. In reality, everyone's kind of worried about their own stuff.
Absolutely.
Which is interesting. So how long, I mean, I know we spoke a little bit before this and you said that you haven't really had a ton of experience with performance anxiety. You've had a couple sort of stints here and there, but how long sort of off and on has this been a thing?
I mean, it's funny because I've sort of like after having this experience, I'm like interrogating like my past a little bit more these days because in general, I feel like the kind of person who can just like play a bunch of concerts and I try to work on like my sort of like mental and spiritual hygiene, if you will, about like accepting mistakes and just acknowledging that, it's never going to be perfect. And the better you get, the more you hear that you want to improve. So it's just, so many cliches about it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. I think accepting that kind of stuff can help you just be a calm performer. And I've always kind of thought of myself as somebody who is more in that direction, that I'm good about just like letting things go and staying in the moment. But since I've had this experience, I'm kind of like looking back and like interrogating things a little bit more and just trying to be like a little more honest with myself about like has the potential for some of this been lurking like kind of beneath the surface. And I think one thing that's tricky with performance anxiety, in my view, is that I think the physiology of arousal it's associated with performing, I think that there's like some overlap between a healthy kind of like focused, energized state of being and like an anxiety state of being. I think that like, obviously it's not one to one, but there's like, I think there's a little bit of overlap in those like kind of physiological states. So, the relationship between your thoughts and your physiological state, like if you think the wrong thing at the wrong time, like something can just like take a fork in the road, and like that arousal that you have that's beneficial can go in a bad way. So I've kind of been looking back and thinking about things. I mean, for me, the last time I had struggles with this, it was honestly just because I was going through something in my personal life that I was just feeling anxious and kind of depressed at the time. I had just started a new job in Canada with the opera company in Toronto, and I had just gone through an experience with my first job in the New Mexico Symphony Orchestra. We had a lockout and subsequently a bankruptcy, and I loved living in Albuquerque in New Mexico, and moving to the climate in Toronto, I just was feeling crummy. And I think that experience of just like kind of feeling isolated and, for anybody out there who's gone through like bad labor disputes and, a bankruptcy or anything like that, it can really blacken your heart. And I was young at the time and very idealistic. And I think just being in that headspace, things in people's personal lives can, of course, drift over into performing. If your like mental state is just frayed and beaten down from dealing with something else, like obviously that can affect you in your performance. So the first time I had trouble with things, as far as performance anxiety, was during that period, and I viewed it more as kind of like a spillover effect from what was happening in my life. And at that period of time, like I think many people can relate to the experience of you start facing kind of some of this stuff. It really motivates you, or it can motivate you to just think, okay, I got to figure this out. I got to figure out what I can do to manage this. And of course, there are a lot of resources out there, just like general books about psychology or anxiety in particular, or sports psychology, things specific to music. And obviously, if you have friends you can talk to, people have gone through this. So people have advice. And I mean, things that work for one person may not work for other people. But, when I think about, the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and actions, and how like kind of that triangle can affect itself, over the years, I've found that depending on where I'm at, it's easier for me to nudge one of those three things in a positive direction, depending on what's going on. Sometimes I can just interrogate my thoughts and say, you know what, I can do this. I'm entitled to sort of embrace the knowledge that I can do this and I'm allowed to feel confident. Sometimes just focusing on a thinking thing like that works. Sometimes thinking about trying to focus on the emotional impact of the music can just like totally re-steer some of those feelings in a more positive direction. I vividly remember being in Toronto in the early days and playing a long run of Tosca in like January and being super depressed. I had just broken up with my girlfriend at the time, and it was really helpful. There's the big cello quartet in the third act before the clarinet has the famous solo in Tosca. Just like really zeroing in on like the beauty of that cello sound and just like the emotional impact of it. Very quickly just like metabolized any negative feelings and turned them into something else. So by the time I had to play the solo, I felt totally chill. And then the other thing is actions. I mean, for me, this last time around, it was really helpful to just focus on actions. So I just was like, okay, I gotta get exercise. I have to cut out coffee for a while, as much as I love drinking coffee and I'm in Portland. Started taking magnesium before I go to bed and when I woke up in the morning. And another action that I try to do is just make sure that, once I got to work and kind of had my reeds figured out and was ready to go, that I just went around and I talked to as many people in the orchestra that I have close relationships as I could. Just go joke with people, have a good time, because that just like reminds you, like, you're connected here. You have friends here. People have your back. Like, you have a track record with these people of being prepared, of trying to do your best, and people know that. And using all of these, I mean, it's like a week. It was about a week ago that I was really like kind of feeling it, and it almost feels absurd at this point to like look back on it, because like I'm like I've kind of come out of it now, but I don't know if anybody's had this experience out there, but like, if you have some weird moment in rehearsal, it's really bad and it follows you home and you feel kind of anxious at home still, you can have that feeling of like, man, am I going to have to change careers? Like what, what I mean? It can really like feel like it comes out of left field. It could be, I mean, I even said to my wife in the orchestra, I was like, what's going to happen if I can't get this under control? But a week later, take care of myself. I mean, I feel like I'm totally on the upswing of it. I mean, that doesn't mean, knock on wood, that doesn't mean something couldn't come back. I have to play Sibelius 1 tonight with a bunch of fast tonguing and a big solo right at the beginning. I'm pretty confident that I'll be okay tonight, but you never know. I think having a little bit of humility about it is not a bad thing. Just knowing that even if you're feeling good at a particular time, like, enjoy that, and things can change, and be supportive of your other colleagues who might be going through something different.
Yeah. And, you brought up a lot of great techniques and things that you do to sort of help yourself through it. One thing that I wanted to share is it's interesting hearing people who are not musicians and or not performing artists, because they watch you perform and they wouldn't ever know that you're nervous. Because, it's the same thing with athletes. Like, we watch athletes and they're like, oh, he's cool as a cucumber or whatever. But I remember my cousin is always like, oh, you don't get nervous anymore because you do it all the time. And my response to him is, no, I get nervous every single time. Every time, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, it depends what it is, but pretty much every time I get nervous. The difference between me getting nervous now and me getting nervous 12, 15 years ago is that I know exactly what kind of physiological reaction my body is going to have. So I know exactly what to expect when I get nervous, and I know exactly when I'm going to get nervous. Yeah. So I know how to sort of counteract it as it's happening, which is the advantage that I have. But it doesn't mean that I don't get nervous. And the other thing that I wanted to share too is I used to have like a really petrifying fear of flying on airplanes, like debilitating to the point where I couldn't fly on airplanes for a good chunk of my life. And I went through therapy eventually and came out of it. And the guy who I worked with, it was very interesting, the technique that he used, because there's always this sentiment that like you have to conquer your fear, right? You have to climb the mountain, you have to fight the dragon, conquer your fear. But his technique, which helped me get through my fear of flying on airplanes, was that you have to accept the fact that you're going to be uncomfortable. You have to, and his big thing was like, you walk on the airplane and the first thing you do is you go to the stewardess and you said, hi, my name's Sam. I'm going to be your fearful flyer today. So you just accept the fact that you're going to be afraid. There's going to be moments on the flight that happen that you are going to be uncomfortable, but just accepting the fact that like, okay, I'm going to get nervous and it's okay to get nervous. It's okay to have this reaction so that you're not fighting all this extra tension that's like, oh, why am I getting nervous? I shouldn't be getting nervous. I can do this. So anyways, those are just two things that I've used. And that
Well,
knowing, go ahead. Sorry.
that's very interesting because I mean, I think for me, sometimes feel like when these things like feel like they're kind of feeding off each other, feeding on itself, it can feel like it's the fear of fear that is
Yes.
the bigger problem than the actual thing itself. And that kind of acceptance you're talking about can really break that cycle. One of the tricks I have in the moment that always works well for me is just to say, there's only one way to practice mastering these feelings, and that's to experience them. So
Yep.
this is a good thing, which is like, feels like a little weird, like outside of an experience like that. But if something like Pines of Rome is coming up and I have to sit there for like 30 seconds before I play something like really that I need a lot of poise for, that can often be when something wells up. If I'm thrown right into some solo or something from playing, that tends not to get me because I just don't even have time to think about it.
Right.
It's when you have like that time for me at least, it's when I have the time to kind of think about something that I can get myself in trouble, and just saying this is an opportunity. And another one of these reframing kind of tactics that always works well for me is just a reminder that that I feel like it's humbling to like, even if what people are feeling in performance anxiety situations is like relatively minor compared to like really difficult mental illness that people struggle with. I feel like it's humbling to have that experience, and I think that there's I try and remind myself that there can be a value in experiencing things like this, like the more difficult and extreme emotions can be a reminder to be more compassionate towards people who have really hard struggles with mental illness that are not their fault. And I think it's easy when, maybe not easy, but when you're kind of just cruising through life and you're feeling relatively good all the time, I think it can be easy to, not discount other people's experiences, but when you don't have that firsthand kind of taste of like, okay, these are the kinds of things that some people struggle with and classes of mental illness that most of us will never experience. I think it's just really a profound reminder to just like be humble about where you are in life and to be compassionate towards people who are going through really difficult struggles.
Yeah. So are there situations like, it's kind of, I'm thinking back to a friend of mine that I had in school. Like, are there situations that you feel like you get more nervous about or less nervous? So like my buddy in school, like he did not get nervous at all playing solos or like solo repertoire or concertos or anything.
Yeah.
And like that for me, that's like, it's still to this day is like the thing that makes me the most uncomfortable is doing that. Whereas he was the opposite. Whereas like playing an orchestra, he was like a disaster, like just a wreck. He just got so nervous. So I don't know, for you, how do you feel about that?
So far, knock on wood. Sorry, I keep doing that.
No, that's good.
So far for me, it's actually more orchestra than anything else. I mean, concertos for sure can make me nervous. I mean, especially if it's like in front of a big crowd. And I'm kind of at this point right now where like I don't play anything from memory anymore, just because I just
Right.
like don't. I just don't want to. I don't want to deal with it. It's like I've played Mozart from memory a couple times. I've played Copland from memory a couple times, and it's just like even the Mozart, I just don't want to. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Which, maybe I should get over that. But for me, it's more orchestral stuff for some weird reason. In chamber music environments, I feel like I understand the flow of things better than I do in orchestra. It's like I'm out here, I'm going to be more or less exposed the whole time. Maybe the audiences are a little bit smaller, which could have an effect. But so far, for some reason, solo stuff doesn't get to me, with one exception. If I'm playing something where, like take like the Schumann romances, where breath control, you're playing like the entire movement. There's not a lot of places to rest. It's really easy to take too many breaths. There are plenty of places to breathe, but like maybe not a lot of places to rest. In those situations, I can end up with like a kind of too much carbon dioxide kind of build up type thing where I have to stop and say, dude, you got to play through these next 3 places where you can breathe. Like you need to just play through all of them, even if you get really uncomfortable by the end, just to like make sure that you're not like kind of like, like pulling in good air on top of bad air and like,
you got to exhale, what I mean? Right? Because like,
exactly.
It's double replayers do it all the time because they have to, oftentimes they have to exhale before they inhale again. But I remember like, I always had the trouble with the Premier Rhapsody, the WC. Like that one, it's like you get to the end of some of the phrases and you just have a tank full of stale air and you just like can't.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny. I don't know why in the I think for me in the orchestra, it's like it's something about kind of changing gears all the time that gets me in an orchestral situation. And it depends on what it is. Like we're playing Brahms 3 in a couple weeks, and something like that doesn't bug me as much because I just feel like the dance between like being kind of 2D, maybe an exposed wind chorale to solo is just like, it's just like so quick that it's just like, I feel like I don't have time to think about it. Whereas something like Pines of Rome, I mentioned earlier, like the timing of it, or I remember I had something a couple years ago, we were playing Cacciatorian Violin Concerto and it has like a really juicy clarinet part. And there was one solo that came right after one of the violinist cadenzas. And I remember spacing out and just like not paying attention during the cadenza one night, and I snapped out of it. And it was just the experience of feeling like, what if I hadn't snapped out of that in time and I had just like missed my entrance? That was what triggered like the kind of panicky feeling. And then the next 2 nights that we repeated the show, when we got to that spot, I had the same reaction, even though I was like definitely paying attention at that point.
Didn't miss it that time. I feel like as an E flat clarinetist, you have to have a lot of calming thoughts because there's a lot of examples of that, like sitting through the whole first movement of Shostakovich 6, 25 minutes or whatever it is, and then you have to, then boom, first thing you play, you got to comment on that ridiculous solo.
You have a lot of time to think about it and not a lot of time to get comfortable.
Exactly. Well, that's interesting. Like I always have trouble, like the orchestra I've actually been a lot more comfortable, though this year probably less than most because I'm playing principal this year. It obviously is a lot more involved, but I'm definitely getting more comfortable with it. But solo stuff and chamber music, man, I get worked up, like
interesting,
really hard about it. And I think it's just probably just because I haven't done it as much, to be honest with you. I think it's just not something that I've really ever forced myself to be comfortable with. So it's definitely a goal of mine to do more of that and get more comfortable in those situations. Just to, just more for a personal triumph than anything else. Not that it's necessary for the rest of my life, but just for a personal thing. So I wanted to also read what you wrote the other day. This was a couple days ago, I guess, is when you sort of responded to all this commentary that you got back. And you said, thanks to everyone who responded to my post about performance anxiety. It was genuinely helpful to read other folks' perspectives on their own experiences. One comment that stood out to me in particular had to do with cultivating solidarity around these issues amongst performers. I think that is a great idea, which could bring many of our own personal inner realities closer to our shared outer reality with regard to concert making. Obviously, everyone is different, and sharing difficult experiences with colleagues isn't going to be productive for everyone. But if there is anything we can do to change our work cultures to make it easier for people to admit and to discuss their performance-related mental health issues, I think it would be good for everyone. It would be a more humane environment to make music for our audiences and each other if we all felt safe to share our struggles, both big and small. So I thought that was another profound comment from you. And also part of the reason why I reached out to you, because I think that, even having a conversation like this between the two of us might encourage younger players or more inexperienced players to realize, they have what we want and they're still going through this. And so I think that it's important to have these conversations. I think it's important to be open about them. I know I'm a pretty open person with my colleagues, as I mentioned earlier, in my section, and they're all very supportive, and we support each other through these triumphs and tragedies, I guess. But how comfortable are you? You seem like a very outgoing person. It seems to me like you wouldn't have any trouble sharing these things.
Yeah, in general, I mean, partly it's just because I'm interested in I'm just interested in people's inner lives and how the human mind just shapes human endeavors and I've always kind of been interested in that type of thing. I've done a lot of reading and so I'm the type of person who tends to maybe annoyingly so I tend to prod people like wanting to know like what's in there, what are you feeling, what are you going
Right.
through. And I just have found over the years that for like every one person who's like annoyed by that, there are 10 people who are like really thankful that like somebody is like interested in what's going on in their head. And so um, you know over the years I've just kind of gotten used to like having a reputation as somebody who's super open about things. Um, and I'm not saying it's always easy. I definitely had like a little bit of hesitation recently, but I just before this recent post and just kind of coming out, opening up about it to my colleagues. But I just kind of knew, like from talking to people, that people go through this, and at the same time, people hide it really well. Like there are people who will go through some like screamingly gnarly internal struggles and just like are able to comport themselves with like total calm and grace on the outside like the entire time. And it's like it's kind of amazing. I mean, but there are major downsides to that as well. Maybe not. I think in general it's good to be able to like be professional if you can and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I think it just demystifying some of the stuff by just bringing it out into the open is really helpful. And honestly, I'd be curious to look at orchestra's contracts with regard to like mental health stuff. I don't know if this comes up in contracts at all, but my wife likes to talk about this kind of stuff as like viewing it like an injury.
Hmm.
Like let's say you have a concert and you practice too much before a concert, you go in and you like do something weird and you tweak some muscle and it like ends up taking 3 months to recover, right? Maybe there are some people in management or conductors who are annoyed at the reality that people have physical bodies that have limits and need time to recover. But I think generally in our society, people are more intuitively accepting of the idea that like, yes, sometimes you get injured and sometimes you need time to recover. I think people are less intuitively open to the idea that our brains might function somewhat similarly. Let's say you take on a bunch of stuff, you're working really hard, you kind of get stressed, and like now something just like snaps, for lack of a better term. That's not a right good term, but you have a weird experience that kind of takes a while to recover. I haven't looked into it enough, so I don't really know this conclusively, but I feel like our orchestra contracts are probably not as forgiving of like people's mental health struggles as they might be of people's physical struggles. If anybody listening knows otherwise, please write to us so we can look at it. But I wonder if this is an issue for contract negotiations, because it's just like, even just knowing if you have a struggle, the institution has your back. And if you need to like take some time to work on things, like the institution has your back, I think would make it less likely off the bat that people would get to a point where they feel like they're really, really being pushed to the edge by a mental health issue related to performing or not, frankly.
Well, and I think too, mental health things like that can be just as debilitating as any sort of physical ailment, if not
If not
sometimes
more.
more so.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. Don't quote me, but I think there's something about it in our contract, but I am not 100%. I remember sometime, I mean, I'm very open that I've struggled with mental health my entire life, but I remember somebody mentioned it to me at some point, but it's certainly not fleshed out in any sort of obvious way that you're talking about it. So yeah, it's definitely something to maybe start talking about in the future, and building in these sort of safety and protections just so you have a healthier workplace. I know, like, my wife runs a business and she lets her employees take mental health days because sometimes you just need them, and sometimes, especially when we're doing something that's as vulnerable as I feel that making music and performing is. You're doing it every day. You're putting hopefully the best of you out there every day for everyone to see. And sometimes it just doesn't go the way that you want it to go. And it can be really harmful to your mental health,
Yeah.
So I think it's good that we're talking about things like that.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So the other topic I wanted to bring up, which is also very generally a taboo topic, which I don't know why, but it is. I just wanted to. I was curious to your thoughts on beta blockers. I know people ask me about it a lot. I give audition master classes and coachings and stuff, and people always ask me about it. I'll start just so you don't feel any pressure or
Sure.
anything. I use them. I don't use them very often. I usually only use them for audition situations or like really stressful performances. So I can't remember the last time I used one for a concert with the ISO. It's been probably a couple of years. So it's been a while since I used them at home. But, if I go play guest principal with another orchestra, maybe that's a situation where I would use them. And the only reason I am a proponent of them is because I feel like it's a way to sort of eliminate another variable in a situation that's always stressful. So basically what it does for me is it just stops any sort of physical reaction. So like I used to get a really bad shake in my leg when I would get really nervous. And obviously having that happening while you're trying to do something very delicate is not the easiest thing to
Not
do.
ideal.
So yeah. So anyways, that's just my thoughts on them. I don't know how you feel about them. But I don't think that they make anyone play any better. I think it just makes a stressful situation a little bit less stressful. And I think that people should use them if they find them helpful.
Yeah, I would say that my thinking on it is pretty in line with what you just said. First thing I would say, I don't think there should be any stigma around them. I think they do affect you, so everybody's experience is going to be different, and I think it's worth considering that there might be some downsides to using them as well. I'm not necessarily saying I think there are, but I think that that's definitely something to think about. My usage historically has been, I'll take like 5 milligrams, like half of a
Right.
10 milligram tablet, which is like potentially a placebo effect. I don't even know, but it just, for me, it feels like it stops any runaway train kind of feelings as far as like a physiological reaction, like that's getting amped up and starting to cause a physical reaction that like may kind of feed back on itself, any of that kind of stuff. So I've always taken them for auditions. I've taken them sometimes for concerto type situations. I pretty much always take one for Rhapsody in Blue, just because for some reason that just like makes me so uncomfortable. Like, just, everybody in the audience
That's a
knows
sit and
it.
wait one too. That's a sit and wait.
Gosh.
Yeah, for sure.
And just like everybody knows it, it's like, it's like maybe not that hard once you figure it out, but also has like a really high rate of like things can go squirrely on you like halfway through the gliss and that kind of thing. And, so for whatever reason, I've always taken that for those. But I'm taking them now. I've been taking them for like every service for like a week or so, which like honestly I've never done that before. I'm not sure I even need them. I just kind of decided when this hit me that I was like, okay, I'm going to stick to this course of action for like a week or two just to like make sure that I think I'm a little bit more in the headspace right now. If I had something really weird, I could put it in perspective and have it not follow me home. And if I got kind of was feeling a little off in a solo or had like kind of a panicky feeling, I think I could push through it and not have it kind of follow me home in a way that like, that's the feeling that really kind of undermines me. But at the same time, I just feel like, I just kind of committed myself to like, for 2 weeks or so, you're going to just do everything you can to kind of keep things in check until you're on a little bit more of a secure footing, and then just kind of wean off of it. But I don't think there's any reason to stigmatize it. If somebody knows better than I'm happy to be corrected, but I don't think there's any major like side effects to them to be concerned about. I know, as far as I know, especially at a small dose, I think if you take 1 or 2 10 milligram tablets, I suspect there's probably a point you'll get to where you're like maybe too mellow for your own good. I think that is potentially a real effect. And being on audition committees every once in a while, I hear somebody that just things are slow and so mellow that like that I can't. I'm sure this is not the case, but every once in a while I have the thought popping in my head like maybe there's too much.
Yeah.
But that's all conjecture. I'm just speculating. But from my personal experience, they're really helpful to have around for certain things, and I definitely don't think there should be any stigma to it. And it's like if you really want to get like wacky with things, like, we're like a bag of chemicals. Like our brain is just like some soup of chemicals and responding to the environment. And so much of it is not in our control. And I know that people have this feeling of like, oh, I really want to get through this on my own will or whatever the heck. And I totally understand that kind of feeling. But, the idea of our sense of self and what is true in the world about how we're meeting the world and our mental states and all that kind of stuff. There's so much of all that is just illusory. And I kind of just feel like, do what it takes to feel good and get centered. And, there's plenty of non-pharmaceutical things that you can do over time to get in a better place as well. But if in the heat of the moment that you want to use that tool, I think it's totally fine.
Yeah, and I appreciate everything that you said. One thing I will add is make sure that you consult your physician before you start, taking any sort of medication or anything, because you don't want to be like selling beta blockers out of our locker. That's not really a good
No, absolutely, for sure. Disclaimer.
But yeah, exactly. But I agree with you. I think they're a tool to be used. I've definitely been in a situation where I felt like it hindered my performance. Like sometimes you need to get amped up a little bit to make things really. Yeah. So before you take them for the first time before a concert, definitely like try it out and figure out like what's too much, what's too little, and dialed it in that way, because you don't want to be in a situation where everything's moving in slow motion. It can slow down your tongue. It can do other detrimental things. So. Anyways, I just wanted to ask you about that because I'm always curious to what people say about it. But yeah, I agree. Let's get rid of the stigma. It's not a bad thing. It's a tool to be used, and if it helps you be less stressed in a stressful situation, I think it's absolutely fine. So let's talk about fun things now. Your chamber music group. It's called Chatter. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this to some degree relates to maybe a little bit to part of what we were talking about earlier with the question of what kind of repertoire is more potentially triggering for anxiety issues and all that. And I think one reason chamber music for me is not that concerning is from a performance anxiety standpoint is that I've been lucky to have the opportunity to be involved with this group for about, it's probably like 14 years now or something. And Chatter is a weekly concert series. We do like 70 concerts a year. And it's really popular and really fun. And it's the model has really taken off. It used to be called the Church of Beethoven, which is a pretty good indication of what it is. It's a Sunday morning kind of humanist gathering centered around music and poetry. That we have a poet every week, rather than around a sermon or a traditional religious service. And it's really been a great experience. I've learned a lot about working with close friends and colleagues for a long period of time and what it takes to kind of stay motivated and stay working well together with people over time. And it's definitely been an enlightening and humbling and wonderful experience to be involved with that organization as it's grown. And also just, of course, to get the opportunity to play a ton of chamber music over the years, which there's so much great stuff out there for clarinet. So
you do 70?
Yeah, so we have every week we do a Sunday morning show. We take off 2 Sundays a year, and then we have a couple other series. We've started kind of expanding up into Santa Fe, which is about an hour north of Albuquerque. So we'll go up there and repeat our Sunday morning show on a Saturday. We started doing that once a month. I think we're moving to twice a month. And they're short shows. People really like to just go enjoy an hour-long show, no intermission, get a little bit of music, and then kind of get on with their day. I think it's an interesting model. I think it could probably work well in other cities. But before the pandemic hit, we had like 200 people a week, which it's not symphony orchestra level, but for like a chamber music thing, having 200 people a week is great. Your budget like starts to kind of work out at that level. Yeah. We developed a really cool kind of casual vibe with the audience. We have kind of like a late night host shtick with like presenting music, talking about music, just joking about stuff together. And we've been doing it mostly in kind of warehouse spaces in Albuquerque as kind of an informal, intimate vibe. And it's been great getting to know the poetry community there in Albuquerque and hearing, I feel like I learn a lot about performing from these poets, like the commitment. Some of the best slam poets, like their commitment to like the nuances of performance is super inspiring.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I didn't know that it was that big of a thing there, and kudos to you. So you're artistic director, or you're one of the artistic directors of it?
I'm associate artistic director.
Okay.
The artistic director, David Felberg, is a violinist, and he and I have been texting and calling and emailing about programming like literally every day for 12, 13 plus years now at this point. And to maintaining a relationship like that when you're working so closely over the years has been really interesting. And like, I can't really imagine doing it with somebody else. David is really enthusiastic. He loves talking about stuff. He's the type of person where, he always takes a moment to think about a particular idea. He never says, "Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this." And, it seems silly to say this, but like if you're going to work that closely with somebody over the years, like there needs to be a positive environment. And even if like 20 ideas get, discarded or tabled temporarily for the one program you go with, to go through all those 20 ideas with an open, an exploratory vibe, it energizes you. Whereas if you're working with somebody who's always trying to find what's wrong with something the second it comes out of your mouth, it just like saps your energy. And so David has been a really amazing colleague on that front. And I can't imagine doing something like this with anybody else. He just has a fearlessness about performing any kind of repertoire, and he wants to just always be getting better. And it's been really fun. I mean, we've done, at some point we're going to be closing in on like 1,000 shows.
That's crazy. Good for you.
Which is probably when I should retire and make way for somebody else. But it's been really exciting, and I love an excuse to go back to Albuquerque because it's a totally different climate than Portland, Oregon. So
yeah. And how often do you get to go back and play with them?
Well, I go back maybe once a month in non-pandemic times. The last 2 years, it's anybody's guess. But for a while when I was living in Toronto and working with the opera company in Toronto, they had a 6-month season. And when I initially moved up there, I didn't have a work permit to work outside the opera. So I went back to Albuquerque. I spent several years, half the year in Albuquerque and half the year in Toronto. And that was a contrast as far as climate and culture and just hustle and bustle of Toronto versus the sort of laid back nature of Albuquerque. But yeah, so since coming to Portland, the symphony schedule is a little more regular than that, obviously, but I've been lucky enough to maybe go back once a month and try and chip in with email administration and all that kind of stuff and whatever I can do from afar when I'm not there. So
awesome, man. Well, good for you. That sounds like a great series. I'd love to check it out if I ever find myself in Albuquerque. I don't think I've ever been to New Mexico.
New Mexico is great. You should totally come.
Yeah, I've heard it's amazing. Santa Fe, I've heard, is really beautiful. And the only thing I know about Albuquerque is what I've seen on Breaking Bad. But but it sounds like they've also got a great chamber music series. So that's worth it as well. Well, James, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really great to meet you and talk with you about this. It was really fascinating to hear your perspective. And I could tell you're very cerebral and you've thought about a lot of these things. I'm always a fan of lifelong learners, and that's what you seem like to me. So great to connect, and thank you so much for doing this today.
Hey, man, thanks a lot for having me. I had a blast, and I look forward to hearing more of your podcasts in the future.
Great. So for more information about myself and the Candid Clarinetist podcast, please be sure to follow us on Instagram at the Candid Clarinetist or drop by our website at candidclarinetistpodcast.com. Once again, my name is Sam Rothstein, and thanks for tuning in to the Candid Clarinetist podcast.